In terms of this edition of Knowledge Connect, which the purpose of which, as Paul said, is really just to do a survey of very recent, new, hot off the press literature, and then give that to the practice community. That's the whole purpose. And in speaking about philanthropy today and sort of summarising the themes of those literature, I'm not going to go through and summarise them all, just the bigger themes. I'm going to speak about philanthropy using three different metaphors. The first metaphor is really philanthropy, the art of philanthropy, so the practice of philanthropy, philanthropy as a practice, and inside that world of examining philanthropy as a practice, the main metaphor used is the market, and the one at the moment is how do we do what happened with, say, share markets 200 years ago when they emerged? How do we create an effective and efficient exchange of social value on the one hand and donors on the other? How are we going to make that market happen? And this is the dominant kind of metaphor being used in the literature. In particularly, one of the books we reviewed, and some of you would have seen the Philanthropic Capitalism folk who came to Perth recently. So that's an inadequate, it's a great metaphor and it's a highly inadequate metaphor as well. It's only one, but it's the only one, it's the main one getting traction in the world. The second one I want to speak about today, and is the one that's the sort of the neglected metaphor, is philanthropy as a science. So understanding philanthropy, understanding this enormous dimension of human behaviour, which has been, it's many thousands of years old. All recorded civilizations have given to the vulnerable in their communities. This is not a new thing. Philanthropy was not invented in 19th century America. So philanthropy as a science, and really looking at it and getting deep into it and understanding motivations, why people give, all the wide varieties of ways they give, and really drilling in and understanding this phenomenal area of human behaviour. Economics has neglected it. It's a very, very under-examined dimension of human behaviour in economics, and it's also a really under-examined area of human behaviour in psychology, and most of the management disciplines as well. It's just, there's not a cohesive body of knowledge on the science of philanthropy. Our colleagues at UWA, and after I'll get Julie to make a few remarks about her research at the moment, which is really going into the deep values that people have and how these are manifested in their giving behaviours, and really understanding if we can get a better match between types of people and types of giving. So the third metaphor I'm going to use in summarising the literature and the trends is philanthropy as a cultural virus. And in order to understand philanthropy in that lens, we have to understand our own culture and how our culture is different from the other cultures where philanthropy thrives. So we all know philanthropy thrives in America, and it thrives a little bit in parts of Germany. It thrives in more in the UK, and in Australia we're behind really in the practice of philanthropy, and here in WA in particular, given our wealth, we're even more behind. But philanthropy is a deeply cultural thing, so what would a philanthropy look like here, or a giving practice look like here, that would kind of spread like wildfire? What do we need to do to make our community a host community for this virus of giving? So that's the third sort of area. So just looking at the literature, I'm principally going to, in terms of the practice of philanthropy, talk about the paper by Maximilian Martin. And Maximilian is a leading person from the private wealth community in Europe, who was one of the earliest adopters in the big banking world, the private wealth management world, who said, we've got access to all these wealthy people, and how can we aid them in being more fulfilled, essentially, in how they make meaning in their lives through connecting them with philanthropic opportunities. And so there was push and pull. He was asked by lots of his wealthy clients, and he was encouraged that he could offer them some new rich dimension to life by helping them with their philanthropic giving. But he's been tracking this whole area for a long time, and his most recent work is this 4 revolutions of philanthropy. And just to summarise them, the 4 revolutions he talks about is the first one. Well, the overarching theme is that theme of the market. So he's saying, and again, being from the financial services community, the meaningful metaphor for that community and for Maximilian is this transformation taking place around the creation of a market for giving. So in the same way that you have a stock market, in the same way you have ratings agencies, in the same way you have hedge funds, the contention of all that view of the world is that we will see in philanthropy, even eventually in Australia, we will see investment decisions being made to donate, not just based on relationships and intuitions and gut feeling. We will see investments made on totally analytical and comparative basis. That's the vision of philanthrocapitalism. It's the vision of most of the private wealth community. It's the vision of vision and expectation of the current age of philanthropy. That's the sort of dominant. Now, there's that assumes that we can measure social impact and social value creation in the same way that we can measure profits or sales or revenues or other kind of harder, clearer things. So until we have an ability to make those analytical and financial comparisons, we can't have a real market. But in fact, the last lunch we had, we spent a lot of time talking about how do you demonstrate social impact, and obviously that's it's a science in its very, very, very early days, but that's the body of work that has to emerge before we can have a genuine market for social value creation. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's his backdrop. He takes that for granted, as does philanthrocapitalism, as does a lot of the literature. But then the 4 revolutions that he talks about, just assuming that market orientation as a backdrop, the 4 revolutions he talks about are, firstly, amplifying social entrepreneurship through synthetic social business. And this comes from the insight that if you rely on having these amazing charismatic individuals who can run very complex social enterprises, then we will never get the job done, because there's hardly any people who want to do that given all the other alternatives of life and their time. So we have a supply constraint of social entrepreneurs. So he talks about how we're moving to a more synthetic social business where we try and prime the pump and create and emulate getting people emulating the behaviour of social entrepreneurs and getting organisations to emulate the behaviour of social entrepreneurs. So that's a whole theme. The second one is he sees microfinance ceasing to be this isolated thing and actually seeing microfinance becoming an inclusive financial services. So not this off to the side thing, but how do we integrate into mainstream financial services that are meaningful to the poorest of the poor and to socially excluded people in countries like Australia. The third theme he talks about is going from they're all market sort of phenomena. The third one is leaving behind development assistance and moving things to a base of the pyramid investment or products. So rather than the aid community donating wells, why don't we invent these water filter things that people can buy and that they just diffuse? And the example that he uses in here and everyone uses is mobile phones, that the poor of the world all have mobile phones now, mostly have mobile phones. And that mobile phone enables them to participate in many more markets for employment, for sale of goods. So the humble mobile phone has become this phenomenally powerful and unexpected source of development assistance. So that's a little sample idea. And the final one is moving from the classical grant making to what he describes, using the language of economics, as the internalisation of externalities. So where we go from, rather than giving people money to do nice things, we recognise that in the same way that carbon is now being priced and people will trade with permits for carbon, that we might recognise that in a community the creation of relationships and friendship networks is actually creating a social positive externality. So we might start funding people to creating a market for the creation of social benefit or social, using that ugly economics language, externalities. So they're the 4 trends in that particular article. I'm going to add one more to that before leaving this aside and asking Julie to talk about her wonderful values research under the category of the science of philanthropy. And I'm going to add the final piece in our Knowledge Connect was Paul and I were just so shocked when we got the report, the World Wealth Report for 2011. So here's the news. A 5th global revolution in philanthropy is that it's tipping to Asia. So there are now, as of this last counting, there are now more millionaires in the Asia Pacific than there are in the whole of Europe. So with Singapore in our time zone and 5 or 6 hours away, as the private wealth capital of Asia, and us here in Perth, and we're in the region with the millionaires, and things aren't looking particularly good for Europe or America, that in this era it will be Asia that will become America will stay the grand dame of philanthropy, but this is where the growth is, this is sort of where the action is. This is where the transfer of knowledge and wealth is happening. So that was really a staggering realisation or revelation, I guess, for us. So that was, that's just a final piece on the revolutions in global philanthropy. Maximilian Martin didn't pick up that 5th one. We identified that one, and we should write some more about that. So moving now, just again in the summarising the literature, there was one piece in here about a meta-study of loads of literature, a literature review of empirical studies in philanthropy, and it identified 8 mechanisms that drive charitable giving, and that reviewed 500 papers which had something to say on that. But that's a study of other people's studies, but our colleagues at UWA are really going right into the deep dimensions of human motivation and behaviour and values, and seeing and learning how that underpins giving behaviour.